Okay, I think we're live. Okay. So hello everyone. I hope you're all doing good. Yes, we are meeting again in another session of Let's Droid, the activity where we talk about modern development tools. If you have assisted in our previous editions, we have tackled several topics. We have started by having a session about Android development. We have tackled a lot of topics during the week. Then we targeted the Flutter, having a session about Flutter Flow and the discussion the Flutter world. And finally, we talked about the most known framework for by Facebook, which is React Native. And finally, we have a panel where we be talking about the modern development tools, and we bring the best people to talk about this topic. So welcome with us, Roman. Welcome with us, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having us. I hope I can live up to the expectation you just set of being, one of the best people to talk about this.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. Welcome with us. Okay, so before starting, so I just forgot to give a brief biography about our guest. So we are honored to have Roman Gieb, who is an engineering director at the of the Android toolkit at Google, and we have Chris Sell, who is a Google product manager on the Flutter Flow experience. Okay, so can you present yourself? Let's start with Chris. Okay.
Sure. Hi. As you mentioned, I'm a PM on the Flutter team here at Google. I'm primarily responsible for the end-to-end developer experience. So it's my job to make sure that developers really love programming Flutter.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm Romain, so engineering director, but that doesn't mean I'm an engineer anymore. So my job is mostly to make sure the engineers on my team can get to do their engineering work. But I've been on Android for 15 years now, 14 years, I don't know, a long time. So I've seen a lot of stuff.
That's a great experience. Yeah. You surely have come through several updates for the Android development. Yeah.
Just a few.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so during another live stream, we'll be tackling some questions that you guys have provided, and our special guest will be answering them. Let's start first by the first question. Question for the Flutter team. So Chris, it states that what is the difference between hot reload and hot restart?
Got it. Hot reload is actually a short way of saying stateful hot reload, and that kind of full phrase is kind of a key to the answer to the question, which is the idea of hot reload is that as you make changes to the UI of your app, those are updated, right? The themes and the layout and the widgets and etc. But the state stays the same, right? So it's essentially the same state now showing in a new way, which has all kinds of interesting properties from a developer experience point of view. Hot restart is throws away the state. So essentially kind of starts the program over at main. But it does that, even hot restart is faster than kind of spinning up a whole new process in a simulator or an emulator. And so it's meant to be I'm going to wipe away all the state and start over from scratch. And that's useful because sometimes you've changed how you structure your data or your types in your app. If you want to have a fast way to keep going on the development without having to shut the app down and start it up from scratch.
Yeah, awesome. So we can say that hot restart is when you want to have a complete restart of your application. Exactly.
That's right. Now, it turns out that it's not just data. Sometimes you've changed the various, the other structure or the initialization of your app, in which case hot restart is also useful. In general, I find that if hot reload isn't giving you quite what you expected, try hot restart, and then you'll almost always get to where you are, where you want to be.
Yeah, I think, but most like the developer used quite the hot reload most like than the hot restart.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Chris. And now let's tackle another question. It's about Android development, and it say that can we say that Java is too old for Android development, especially now that Google is going for Kotlin first. So
So I don't quite know what the question means, but if what you're trying to get at is should you stop using Java or will we stop using Java? The answer is not really. I mean, if you don't want to use Java, that's completely fine. You know, we have Kotlin, great interop, we have great support in the IDE. But if you have a large code base that's using Java, like by all means, you can continue using Java if you prefer Java. For what it's worth, if you go look at the source code of Android itself, we have millions of lines of code written in Java, so it's not going anywhere fast. And you know, Java is still like a great language in itself, so there's no reason why like it should go away.
yeah, yeah. I think it's still like the basic of the Android system. Like it's still
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it is, and you know, there's also tons of libraries written in Java and so on. I personally myself prefer Kotlin, and with some of our newer libraries like Compose, you know, Compose is written in Kotlin, and it relies on capabilities of the Kotlin language. So you should look at Kotlin if you're not already using it, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I think the question is more like would be like support for the Java libraries, or it will be like Kotlin first, no more support for Java.
No, there's still support for Java.
Yeah, awesome.
Like I said, we use it for the platform, so we need it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, I think we have answered. Just a quick note: if your answer was not like satisfying, you can just send another message, and we tackle that.
For sure. Hold us accountable.
Yeah. Okay, so we will move on to another question, which is so he's saying that many people find the concept of keys a bit unclear, the concept of controllers also. Can you tell us more about this new concept that are bring to the Flutter world?
Yeah, so keys are kind of a way to give Flutter some information about your widgets so that it can, when it's rebuilding the widget tree, it can do so in both the most efficient way possible, but also the most correct way possible. So Flutter itself already knows how to do it very efficiently. What happens without keys is when it's time to do a rebuild and it's got a new a widget or a set of new widgets, it will compare those to old versions and come up with the minimum difference, so it can reuse the underlying elements that you don't generally use directly, but your widgets mapped. And the idea of keys is you can use those as a way to both boost the ability of Flutter to be faster, more efficient when it's finding out if something is in fact the same, as well as more correct. For example, without keys, you've got a list of stateful widgets. Without keys, the algorithm that it uses to calculate the differences has no way of knowing about the underlying state. So that a key is a way to reflect the fact that you've got an underlying stateful widget and the unique identifier for that widget and that state, so that it can do the matching properly when it comes to reusing old elements. In general, if you're using stateless widgets, you probably don't need keys. But if you're keeping lists of stateful widgets, you probably do. And there's an excellent YouTube video on the Flutter channel, YouTube channel, all about keys and all the much more detailed, thorough explanation of what I just said. When it comes to controllers, controllers are a way for a widget to expose some knobs on it that you could get to during the lifetime of that widget. So being able to say, oh, I've got, a text controller, a text widget is stateful, right? It's gonna live for the lifetime of, when you're showing it and when you're typing into it, and you want to keep all that state. A controller allows you to reach into it and say, oh, I want to, reset the text, or, change the formatting, or, whatever the stateful widget wants to expose to you as a control surface during the lifetime of the widget, as opposed to, stateless widgets. You can just create a new one with a new set of parameters, and it will render new things. Controllers are essentially a control surface for stateful widgets. So in both the case of keys and controllers, they generally surface when you've got underlying state that you'd like to preserve while you're re-rendering. And so they actually, the concepts go together very nicely.
Awesome. Thank you for the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Just I have used React. I think is it the same concept of keys in the React world? So when you have React elements and you add the property of a key when you're using multiple lists, like a list of items, you add each item as a key. Is it the same concept, or?
My understanding is it is generally the same, although I admit it has been a while since I've written a React program.
Yeah, awesome.
Once I tried Flutter, I didn't want to go back.
That's an advice that you give. Okay, so awesome. Okay, let's now talk a little bit about Kotlin. And we got a question stating that with Kotlin Flow, state flow, and shared flow, do we still need the live data?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have to use live data. You can use Kotlin flows, but live data is still, it's a solution that was needed before Kotlin. So it's still useful for Java developers. It's also, in many ways, you can see it as a simpler solution. So for folks who are, starting programming, that may be easier to learn live data than trying to understand flows and coroutines and so on. But yeah, you absolutely don't need live data. You can just use Kotlin flows. That doesn't mean that live data doesn't have its place. That's my point.
Yeah, it still has place on the. Will it be like replaced in the Android Jetpack libraries, or to still be there?
So again, we want to support, your architecture, like the way you designed it. So if you look at Compose, for instance, we have support for both. So your data can come from live data or from flows, because we want to be agnostic in that space.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Okay, so now we have a question. It's about Flutter, and it's about some publication about Chris. He's saying we saw many publication on your Twitter account on a package called GoRouter. It's now in the 2.2.1 version. Can you tell us more about it and a description and what it does?
Holy cow, I can't believe I've already gotten that far on the version number. I lost track. I just kind of keep bumping the version number when I make changes. The only reason it's at 2.x at all was because in my 1.x, I got a little too clever with the API design, and I had a popular demand to change one little part of GoRouter to do something different, which was a breaking change, and that's why I went from 1.0 to 2.0. In general, GoRouter is meant as a custom router package. It's meant to wrap the underlying router API, which is sometimes called Navigation 2. And the reason it's called that is because we have always had navigation built into Flutter. You've always needed to go, between multiple pages and push and pop, et cetera. That's always been part of Flutter. But it was very difficult, in some cases impossible, to do the right thing when it came to deep and dynamic links. And so the new router API is all about adding that capability with that increased capability came with it some increased complexity as well. And so over the last 6 months or so, there have been a number of these custom router packages available on PubDev. And evenings and weekends, I program Dart and Flutter for fun. I have a couple of little side projects that I care about that are real world for me. And so I needed a solution to this problem, just like any Flutter developer. And I specifically wanted to support dynamic and deep linking. And I did a survey, and there were a number of very full-featured, very mature custom routers. I had trouble with all of them just from my own personal API point of view. All the authors get to decide how they build their APIs and how they write their docs and samples, and I didn't find anything that really resonated with me personally. And so, of course, being a tooling PM, what could I do but build my own? And so that's what GoRouter is. And I have a small number of principles. I try to keep the API as small as possible. I try to get out of the way and let normal Flutter concepts rule the day. I don't try to re-implement anything that you could just do normally in Flutter. I focus on the routing aspect, and I make sure to surface the capability of the underlying router API when it comes to deep and dynamic linking and the URL path strategy, being able to do nested navigation, being able to do redirection and route guards, all the things that are features that you want in a navigation package. I try to surface in the simplest possible way, mostly because I'm a simple fellow and I like things to be nice and simple for me. And then I have a history as a writer. So every time, another principle I had is anytime I expose a new feature that I expect people to actually use and understand, then I add that to the documentation. So over time, the documentation has become somewhat long. I need a table of contents at the beginning to be able to get to all of the spots in the documentation. I've so far resisted bringing it to multi-page. It's just a really long README. We'll see how much longer that lasts. But yeah, I mean, the GoRouter is just my attempt at a custom router package for Flutter.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think it's quite popular. We have a friend, he's following you, and he's always posting about GoRouter, and he's using it. So
that's
thank
great.
You so much thank you so much for this.
One satisfied customer. Happy to hear.
Yeah, he's very satisfied.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, so now let's talk about we're talking about Flutter, and there is another tool that is rising in the multi-platform area, which is Kotlin multi-platform. Can you talk about it a little bit, Roman?
Yeah, and more specifically, I think the question is the difference between Kotlin multi-platform and cross-platform framework. So Kotlin multi-platform is not a framework. It's at the language level. So it's effectively the compilers, APIs, and various tools that JetBrains provide to let you write Kotlin code that can compile to JVM, Android, native. So you would use native on iOS, for instance, or JavaScript. There are some implications in what language features we can use, some of the APIs. They have great documentation around all that. And of course, on top of this, you can build multi-platform libraries and multi-platform applications. So there are a bunch of things that are being written by the community. I think OKHTTP3 from Square is multi-platform, for instance. And there are more and more coming every day. Obviously, if you that requires the library to be written in Kotlin. So I think we're seeing some developers switch from Java to Kotlin so that they can take advantage of Kotlin multi-platform. So this is something that we keep a keen eye on. We know that a lot of developers in the community are interested. We obviously, JetBrains are amazing partners. We collaborate on a number of things. And JetBrains themselves have been exploring things with Compose. For instance, they have Compose for desktop. They take the open source version of Compose, and they've done a desktop version of Compose. So currently, I think it targets only Kotlin JVM, but they could certainly go beyond that. So yeah, it's exciting. Again, I love Kotlin, so I'm glad if it can be helpful to more than just Android developers or more than just JVM developers. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I think there is another question. Will we see Kotlin multi-platform in the web? Will we see Jetpack Compose on the web? That's the correct question. We have seen Jetpack Compose on the desktop, on the mobile. Will we ever seen it in the web?
I mean, there's no reason it couldn't happen. Like I said, currently, JetBrains is doing it for desktop. Our current focus, obviously, is Android. That's our main priority, and there's still a lot that we have to do in Compose for Android and for mobile before, because we have the existing toolkit has been around for 15 years, so it has a lot of features that don't all exist in Compose. There are a lot of things that we still want to do and that we still need to do there, right? Developers keep asking us about those features, so we want to focus on that before we can worry about other things.
Let's hope our dream make reality. Okay, thank you so much, Roman. Now we have another question that targets widgets in Flutter, and especially the testing of the widgets. Can you explain it more?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Testing.
Yeah,
widget testing.
Yeah, widget testing, exactly.
Sure. So there's a number of ways to do testing in your Flutter apps and packages. One is just plain old unit testing, right? Testing the non-UI, the business logic, the domain-specific logic, all of the stuff that isn't UI. That tends to be the low-hanging fruit. The Dart testing framework is fantastic. It's just a joy to use. I'm a test-driven development kind of guy, so I almost always write those tests first and then go and do the code. So I do that very much in my Flutter packages. The next little testing is unit testing for widgets themselves, where you can write UI-driven tests that'll spin up your app, spin up the widgets, navigate. You can simulate mouse clicks and those kinds of things. Wait for the UI to settle, etc. You can do all that with something we call the widget tester or the widget tester API. Essentially, it's just like the Dart testing, except you have a little library that allows you to manipulate the UI. So you can write your widget test that way. And then we also have a package that we now ship out of the box with the Flutter SDK called integration test. And the idea of integration test, it is meant to be not just a unit test on a specific widget, but an end-to-end test on your app. But you still use the widget tester API. So all three of those are the kinds of things that you want to write, and we've been working to make sure that those same set of tests work across mobile and web, our two stable platforms, and we also have some work to do to make sure it works on our desktop operating systems. But the idea is that you can write tests at any one of these levels to make sure that your Flutter apps and packages work the way you expect.
All right. Thank you. We have another question about Jetpack Compose. Say that with Jetpack Compose, with the support by Google, can we expect the XML and data binding will be deprecated in the near future?
So that's a similar answer to what I was saying about Java, right? There are still many apps written using XML and data binding and other things. So yeah, no, this is not going away. We're not deprecating any of that anytime soon. Honestly, some of the Vue stuff might never be deprecated just because it's still a fundamental of the platform. So things like remote views, even the base view class is what Compose uses to interact with the system. So maybe someday in a long time, but you shouldn't worry about it, right? Like you should look at a technology, be it Compose or something else, like for instance Flutter, right? Like if it's what's right for your application, don't wait for us to slap a deprecated on an API. Use what makes sense for you, what increases your productivity, what allows you to write a better application. We provide different solutions for different needs. We give guidance, right? And I would certainly encourage you to look at Jetpack Compose, that's for sure. Because honestly, like I think once you try Jetpack Compose, it's really hard to use XML and views. But if those work for you, that's completely fine.
Yeah, exactly. I think Google is like encouraging developers to use Jetpack Compose, but in the same time, they are also free to use the current tools and current built-in tools.
Yeah, and we want to be mindful. Again, people have already invested years sometimes in some applications, and we're not yanking the rug under you, right? Like we want to make sure that you remain successful and that you don't have to drop everything and move to Compose. That's why, for instance, we both Compose and Kotlin, a lot of our efforts went into interop with the existing system, so you can slowly transition over time at your own pace, and you don't have to worry about what other people are doing.
Yeah, I think there is also like an integration between Compose and the usual like view, XML view.
Yeah, and interop goes both ways, right? Like we see apps that put Compose as the items inside the recycler view. We see apps that do a lazy column in Compose and then put views inside the items, or they do both. It's really meant for that. So again, the same thing as with Kotlin. So you can slowly transition your application.
Yeah.
Or quickly if you're really into it. Like that's okay. That's okay with us.
Yeah. We're hoping that go quickly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we have like another question, which is about Flutter. It says that can we integrate native code like Kotlin or and we have like the GoRouter fun is here.
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah.
The goal of Flutter has never been, hey, what's the least common denominator across all of the platforms we support, but rather, how do we make it a really great developer experience no matter which platforms you're supporting? And so to make that possible, we have to make it possible for people to get to the underlying native SDK across any of these platforms, whether it's Android or iOS or web, desktop, wherever it happens to be. We always allow you to get to the underlying native API. And we provide a couple ways to do that. One is through something called a platform channel. And essentially it's a message passing technique where you send a message from your Flutter program in Dart over to whatever is the underlying native technology. So if it's Android, it could be Java or Kotlin. If it's iOS, it could be Objective-C or Swift, etc. And there's that message makes its way over, with unpacked. You can write whatever native code against whatever native APIs you want, package up some results, and send a message back to the Dart code and the Flutter code. So you can always do that. And in fact, that's how we build, that's the architecture of plugins for Flutter. The ability to be able to say, hey, I have a Dart API, but it is underlying, it has native code for Android, it's got native code for iOS, it's got native code for web, it's got native code for Windows, etc. Whatever set of platforms the plugin supports. But you can bring the plugin into your project, write it against the Dart code, and then the compiler will pull in the native code depending on the platform you target. You can always do that, and that's what platform channels enable. Then we have another technology that's newer called Dart FFI, which stands for Foreign Function Interface, which allows you to make direct calls to C APIs, regardless of where they come from. They come from C or C++ or Rust or a number of languages expose C APIs at this point. And so you can actually make direct calls without any message passing into underlying C APIs. So you have both of those capabilities. Certainly, if you're on Android and you would like to use platform channels and call from your Dart code into your Android code, and you happen to be writing your Android code in Kotlin, you can totally do that. Absolutely no problem.
That's
And when it comes to finding an example of such things, the docs for on Flutter Dev will tell you how to do interop with your platform of choice, and certainly we have samples that show how to do this with Android.
Yeah. Okay, so just a question, like this new technique that you have mentioned, were it mentioned like in the Flutter 2.0, or is it like new, or it has always been?
FFI, we've been developing for quite a while. It was in beta for quite a while. It's been recently moved to stable 1.0 for use in production apps. And I believe that happened prior to Flutter 2. But now I would have to jump in my Wayback Machine and check the specific moment we shipped Dart FFI 1.0. But it's been in production quality for a while.
Yeah. So you can use it now or anytime. Yeah. Okay. We have like another question about Android development. It say, what are the option to debug and test our UI in Android? Like, what are the different tools that we will be using and we can use to test our UI applications exactly?
That's a very broad question. So it depends, first of all, if you're using the view system or Compose. So for instance, in Compose, we've designed testing APIs that come with Compose, so they're a lot easier to use. We also have solutions like RoboElectric to be able to automate UI testing. Of course, there's unit testing, all the things that you would expect from the normal testing tool set. For debugging, the main thing we have, so we used to have a tool called Hierarchy Viewer that now has been replaced by something better called Layout Inspector. It's part of Android Studio. So Layout Inspector will let you see the full tree of views and their properties, right? So you can see exactly at runtime what dimensions your views have, how they are connected to each other. And more importantly, and that's one of my favorite features, it can show you where the values that are used came from, because we have a complex resource and theming system. So sometimes the actual color that you see on screen, might come from an attribute that comes from a theme, that comes from another attribute, and so on and so on. And that has been historically difficult sometimes for developers to figure out, like, why is it blue instead of red? Also now in the layout inspector, it will tell you, like, this comes from this file, you click on the link and it takes you to the file. So that's I think one of my favorite features. And then in terms of, I don't know if that was part of the question, but there's also the question of profiling, right? So we also have a suite of profilers that are part of Android Studio. We have different types of profilers. We have the sampling profilers, we have the method profilers, and then we have the system profiler, like depending on what you're trying to understand about your application. And we have great documentation on developer.android.com that I highly recommend you take a look at to understand, like, when to use which tool, because they're really for different use cases. But yeah, there's a ton. And so back to Compose, if you're really interested in the Compose testing in particular, again, on developer.android.com, there's a really good page that explains how to write your tests. And you'll see it's, I must admit, I wrote more tests with Compose than with Views because it's just more enjoyable and easier. And I think that's important, right? If we want people to do the right thing, we have to make the right thing easy to do. So I think that's the case with Compose.
Yeah. It's more like of a developer tool, like that, like promotes the testing, like when you use in testing for Jetpack Compose, it's more like easier than testing the usual XML.
Yeah, and there's other things like, the add preview annotation that lets you visualize a widget directly in the IDE as you type the code. So you don't even have to actually run testing, right? It's a form of testing. It shouldn't replace automated testing, but it avoids running the app at all and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Just like a quick reminder for our community, we are also holding a giveaway, and you can just comment with Droid, and you can participate in the giveaway and win a special GitHub t-shirt. Okay, let's get back now to our questions. I think we have a question about it's posted in Twitch. How can we use the 3D mode of Layout Inspector to debug our UI? I think it's more for the Android.
Yeah, so the 3D mode just helps you visualize like how things are layered inside the application. You know, it's not that important in terms of performance. Like years ago, you know, we talked about overdraw, like with the GPUs at the time, it was important to not redraw too much, but still, it still gives you valuable information. So even if overdraw is not an issue, like if you see that you have multiple views with the background, but several of them are being hidden, maybe you don't need them, right? Like getting rid of them will speed up like inflation of the application. It will simplify your UI tree. So it just helps you like get a better understanding of how like things are related to each other that you can't really see with the 2D representation. So just one more way to visualize your UI tree and understand the application. It's also helpful when you start. Let's say you start at a new company and it's a new code base and you don't know how things work. Like that's a good way to just poke at the application and understand how it's structured.
Yeah, I really hope that answered the question. Thank you so much, Ron. Okay, now let's talk about state management in Flutter. We see like quite a lot of packages about state management. We can see Redux, we can see Mobex, etc. So for you, what is the best or the recommended state management package?
So there's a number of different state management solutions, just like earlier when we were talking about custom router solutions, and they're based around different philosophies, different ways to arrange an API, different ways to think about the problems, different core concepts. All of them are based on underlying mechanisms provided by Flutter, and then built on top of that in various ways. The one that the Flutter, well, let me back up. If you have experience in MobX on other platforms, if you have experience on Redux on other platforms, if you have experience in books on other platforms, and you like that style of state management, you can find Flutter equivalents, MVVM, MVC, right? I mean, the various ways to architecture the data flow in your app. And almost all of them that I can think of are available already for Flutter in mature versions that I would recommend, right, that you could pick up and use and be successful with. So if you've already got a special way that you like to write your code, I'm sure you can find it in Flutter and it'll solve your problem. That said, if you come to Flutter kind of fresh and like, I'm willing to kind of take the Flutter's team recommendation and potentially learn something new, then our recommendation is Provider. And Provider provides a great mix of capability and simplicity and support from the author and a nice, tight, efficient implementation that continues to be evolved and supported by the author. And it scales nicely with the size of your app without imposing any kind of specific architecture on your app. So all things being equal, we recommend Provider. That said, so we hear from people that when they have teams, they have larger apps, that they prefer some kind of imposition of architecture on their app. What I find is those kinds of folks tend to pick Flutter Block, which is based on state management solution that we use internally at Google for various projects. And so it really depends on what you like, how you want to solve that problem, and Flutter allows you to solve it in pretty much any way you like.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's up to him to choose the right solution. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the future of dependency injection libraries, especially in Android development tools. We have seen that Google has released the Dagger Health, and there is quite a lot of other tools like Coin. Can you talk about general tools and especially about Dagger Health?
Yeah, so the Dagger and Health is what we recommend for dependency injection. But you have to understand that when we make recommendations, that's a way for us to tell you, look, if you don't care about the architecture, you just want something that works, you want something that's battle tested, you want something that will be documented, here's a solution, right? And I think that's extremely powerful when you're new to Android, or like I said, you have other things to worry about. That doesn't mean it's the only thing you should be using, right? If you think there's a better solution or a solution we prefer, by all means, feel free to use that other solution. I know there's been a lot of talks in the Android community about dependency injection versus service locator and which one is which and which one is better. Again, you shouldn't worry too much about this. Either pick the recommended solution, or you know what you're doing and pick the solution that you think works best for you. That's what matters. Because in the end, you should be worrying and focusing on what's good for your business. And I assume that your own users don't really care whether you're using Health or Dagger directly or something else, right? Like they care about the application itself. So we're just here to provide solutions to help you get to your users faster. So what the future of dependency injection is, I don't really know. I know there are multiple good solutions. They all work great. They're all battle tested. So don't get sucked into those wars online. Pick what works for you and you'll be fine.
Yeah. It's still like a personal and business solution. Like you can use it for your apps and you can choose like the tool that is special for your business. Okay, thank you so much, Ron. I think we have like a question for Chris. It says that as a Flutter product manager, what do you think about Flutter Flow? We had recently a session about Flutter Flow with Abel. I don't know if you know him. So what do you think about it?
Yes, both Axel and Abel I am familiar with. I worked with them on their presentation in Flutter Engage, the great little video they did. I'm a big fan of their work. I think Flutter Flow is really great. I love to see the direction they're taking Flutter Flow. This idea of low code, no code solutions has been rising, and I like the capabilities and the way they expose that configuration to developers. And I also like, of course, that they generate Flutter, which means that if you can't get 100% of the app that you need in their tool, although they're making it easier and easier over time with new features to get 100% of the app you need. But if you can't get 100%, that means you can generate all the Flutter code and add your own code for whatever the percentage is missing, your own custom code, which is great, which is a great way of allowing someone who's potentially not a developer to build up a whole app and then to hand it off to a dev team to finish it up and get it out the door. But also because of the way they've done it, because they generate Flutter code, that means that any platform that Flutter develops today or in the future, they support, right? So they get this kind of multi-platform support almost for free because of the work they're doing. So I'm a big fan. I really like not only Flutter Flow but the company, the founders.
Yeah, they're very awesome. Like the amount of work that can be done to make an app is very reduced. Like you can like make a specific application in several minutes. That's very awesome. I think there is another question, like for you, Chris. It's a little bit spoiler. It's talk about Flutter Engage. Do you plan to have another Flutter Engage edition?
Well, so it's funny. If you look back at the history of Flutter specific events, you'll notice that we haven't used the same name for any one of them. So whether we reuse Flutter Engage or not, signs point to no, if I had my magic 8-ball. Whether we will be sponsoring Flutter specific events, again, we absolutely will, 100%. Whether that will happen in 2022 remains to be seen. I certainly hope so and expect that we will. but I can't quite pre-announce it here today. Sorry about that.
Yeah. We are sorry we're not having an announcement for Flutter Engage.
Sorry about
Although, like, we had pretty much fun in the previous edition. We're hoping to have another event.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the events too. It's a chance for all of us to come together as a community,
Yeah.
especially in this in-person events.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chris. We have like another question about Android. It say why the Android team support MVVM and not the MVI architecture, for example.
I think I'm going to start sounding like a broken record, but so Android, again, doesn't really care about the architecture that you use in your application. I believe in some of our samples or our DevRel documents, we use MVVM because we kind of need to have a name to like discuss an architecture, and that's the architecture that's been used. But you can totally use MVI, and again, the idea is like, do what's right for you, do what makes sense for your application, what makes sense for your architecture, what you're used to. We provide different building blocks, and from that you can build your application. Again, we have like suggestions through demonstration and examples, but they're not like this is the way that you have to build your application. I know that the Android community loves to talk endlessly about MVVM versus MVP versus MVI versus like whatever's going to come next. I'm sure tomorrow there's going to be a new one. Yeah, I myself, like, as long as it lets me write the rest of the app, I don't really care. But obviously, some people do, and they're all great solutions. Obviously, they've all been used like successfully in different applications at different sizes. And when you see like, especially the large companies, they tend to come up with their own frameworks. Like, for instance, was it Airbnb with Mavericks? That was their solution to the problem. It helped them. That doesn't mean it's the right solution for you. And other companies have their own solution. So, in the end, especially as your app grows, like, you tend to like go towards something that's more ad hoc.
Yeah. Is there like a recommended architecture for Jetpack Compose user?
Yeah. So Jetpack Compose users, like I said, what's interesting is we ensure that there's only a single source of truth, and that becomes your application, not the UI toolkit itself. And that means, what that source of truth is in your application. Again, that's up to you, right? I mentioned earlier, you can use like data, you can use flow, you can use anything really. And the trick also is our industry is still pretty young. I know it's been like 40, 50 years. But compared to other industries, it's very young, and we're still like changing and finding the best pattern, right? Like functional programming is back on the front stage. It used to be object-oriented programming. Now it's kind of like a hybrid. I'm sure 5-10 years from now it's going to be something else. So just be careful and don't assume that what's good today is going to be the right thing tomorrow. I think the key is to be flexible, to be able to adapt, and that's what we try to do in some of our APIs, right? We want to give you guidance and kind of a framework without like painting you in a corner. And it's a difficult line to walk.
Yeah. So it still depends like on the use case, right?
Yeah, and you see that all the time, right? Like, you go on Reddit and you see someone say like, oh, I read this article from 2009 and they said to do blah this way, and that's dumb, it doesn't work. It's like, well, yeah, but that was, over 10 years ago, so things have changed, the hardware is different, we learn things, sometimes we also make mistakes. I mean, Chris, I assume like the same thing happened with Flutter, right? A big part of what we do when we build APIs and frameworks, you're kind of first, so you have to take leaps of faith and you learn things, right? And that's why we love working in the community, because we learn what works, what doesn't work. So Compose is a realization of what we've learned with the existing APIs. And I'm sure, in 15 years, like, we'll have a lot of complaints about Compose, and we'll fix them another way. Like, that's, it keeps us employed. Let's put it this way.
It's the life cycle of.
Yeah, we're not. Flutter and Compose are not the first UI toolkits and frameworks, and they won't be the last.
Yeah. That's not true. Don't say that.
I admire your optimism, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Roman. When talking about architecture, like for Flutter, is there like any recommended architecture, or it's also like but about your use case.
Yeah, the answer to those kinds of questions is always the same. It
Yeah.
depends. Right? It depends on what problem you're trying to solve. It depends on the scale of your app. It depends on the scale of your team. It depends on the expertise and the history of your team. Depends on the leadership for your team. Depends on the kinds of targets you're aiming at and the number of targets you're aiming at and the form factors and the inputs. And it would be presumptuous of me to say, this is how thou shalt architecture your app in Flutter. Flutter in general tries to impose as few architectural restrictions as possible. However, even so, it still has some, right? I mean, it's declarative and composable and reactive. And those are the core, and already those have a large impact on your architecture. And so I wouldn't presume to say, oh, and by the way, you have to use MVVM and you have to use, I don't know, the repository pattern and you have to use this or that. We just don't, we try to be as neutral as possible because, as Roman said, we're still learning. We're always learning about the best way of doing things. And I wouldn't presume to say that the Flutter team knows better than the entire rest of the developer community how to architect an app.
Yeah, and then there's an interesting, I think, larger discussion here, right? Like, I feel like it's important to realize that all those patterns, architecture patterns, design patterns are extremely useful tools in your toolbox. That doesn't mean they have to be followed to the letter, right? It's the same thing with like agile development, right? Like there's one way to do agile, or like that's very structured, but you can also adapt it to your team and to your needs. So you should know those tools. You should know what they mean. You should know when they are useful. You should know like what are their weaknesses and strengths, and build on that, right? I think I will always remember, like once, I don't remember, I think maybe it was on Stack Overflow or somewhere else a long time ago, where someone had built like a very simple app. I think it was something like a calculator. And then someone said, oh, you did it wrong because you didn't use MVP and you don't have a model package and a view package. I'm like, it's a calculator. Like you don't need an architecture for that app at all. And if you did, like, you don't have to put your models in a model folder. Like that's, so again, like be careful, like don't be dogmatic, basically. I think it's good to look for recommendations and to look for like guidance. But it's not because someone said something with conviction and forcefully that they are right. So yeah. Like, understand those things and where they shine, and then you'll be able to know like when to use it and how to adapt them to your own needs.
Yeah, so the most important is to not get driven by the flow.
Yeah, it's also important for, to Chris's point, like when we build those frameworks, we have to be careful, because if you bake something, let's say we had baked, MVC early on in the view system, like very, very deeply. Maybe it would have been helpful at first, but here we are 15 years later, and basically nobody's using MVC anymore. They use like other architectures. Would that be a good thing? Maybe in the sense that there would be one way of doing it, but that might not be the right way for you today. So it's and I know how frustrating like that answer might sound, right? But it's good like to keep that flexibility to future-proof those systems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you so much. We have like another question about Jetpack Compose. It says that some developers say that layout editor of XML is one of the reasons to not switch to Jetpack Compose, as Jetpack Compose is still not a layout editor. Is it in the plan of the Android Toolkit team, or?
So I'm glad to hear that you like the layout editor. I think it's very powerful with constraint layout. This is, we've had lots of discussion about this. Ideally, I would love to see a fully fledged layout editor for Compose. It is more difficult by the nature of Compose because it is pure code. So creating an editor that lets you modify the code afterwards and lets you go back in the editor, you need like full two-way synchronization between arbitrary code and a layout editor. So I've seen different tools try to do this over the years. Either it comes with limitations, or it's easy to like put yourself in a place where like suddenly the tool doesn't work, or the generic code like becomes a mess. So if we were to do this, we'll do it only when we know we can do it right. That said, if you go watch the demos that Tor did at ADS, so the Android Developer Summit that happened last week, a couple of weeks ago, he showed like some examples of what we're doing for Compose, where it's not a layout editor per se, but it's a number of tools inspired from the layout editor. So you can see, for instance, all your animations, and you can see a timeline of all the animations in your code. You can scrub the timelines to like play the animations in the previews. So, we can do a lot of things like this to help you before, we do a full layout editor. So can you expect a layout editor? I don't know. And even if I knew, I can't make any promise. But we are definitely looking into making the experience better than just having pure text in a code editor. And by all means, please, give us feedback based on what you see, and we'll try to do what we can to help you.
Yeah, I think the Android developers get used about the layout editor, they can leave. That's why they're asking.
It's funny because when we introduced the layout editor, tons of people told us no, I don't want to use it because XML is better. Now that so people like what they're used to, and that's fine. And I think we need different tools for different profiles. That's completely okay. We try to do everything, but like I said, it's a lot of work. So we have a list of priorities, and we're trying to go through it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think it's become quite used, especially with the introduction of motion layout and all the magic that it's bringing.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned those animation previews in Compose, because for animation specifically, I think it's really helpful to being able to scrub through a timeline to really test the animation, see the impact of the curve, synchronizing animations together. So that's why we have that, for instance.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think we got to the latest questions. It's quite philosophical. It's about what's the future of Flutter. How the future of Flutter looks to you, Chris?
The future is so bright, you gotta wear shades. A little phrase from the 80s, flashback there for you. So the future of Flutter, the near term is, we've had Android and iOS in production for 3 years, and those underlying platforms continue to grow and change, and we want to make sure that we continue to grow and change with them. Particularly, I would love to see Flutter take a much better advantage of the underlying capabilities of Android. Android just keeps getting more and more amazing with every release, and so I would like it to be easier and easier for Flutter developers to take advantage of that amazingness. We just released web support in March. But it's just a V1, right? We've got a lot of work to do there in terms of performance and accessibility and SEO and fitting into the web better, integrating with the web better, supporting more and more capabilities that we do on the web. And then we have 3 whole new other platforms that we haven't even brought to stable yet. So Windows and Mac OS and Linux are on our list there. Plus, we have a bunch of partners and companies building Flutter integration for other platforms. Samsung is building support for Flutter on Tizen, and Toyota is building support for Flutter in cars, and Flutter is going into way more places than Google could ever support on their own, and we continue to see. We work with partners like Samsung and Toyota and Microsoft, but we also see companies do crazy things like bringing Flutter to refrigerators or microwaves or industrial equipment or Android TV or Apple TV or all these places that we don't support, but that's not stopping the Flutter community, right? So and we want to encourage that kind of thing. Our goal for Flutter is anywhere you need to move bits around. Ultimately, we'd like Flutter to be there if it's possible for that to happen.
Thank you so much. That seems very bright. Okay, what about like the Jetpack Compose? How do you see like the future of Jetpack Compose? What can we expect like?
So I'm terrible at predicting the future, but like I think some of the things that are clear is that more and more developers are moving to Kotlin. Like some of the Jetpack libraries are moving to Kotlin. Compose is gonna get the missing features compared to existing UI toolkit. Plus, it's gonna get its own features. Like there's gonna be a lot of innovation, I think, in Compose. And if you followed ADS, we announced Android 12L. So L stands for large screens. So we're revitalizing the presence of Android on things like tablets, for instance, or foldables. And we've been building a lot of new APIs and tools to make it easier for developers to bring their experiences to all those form factors, in an easy manner. And I'm kind of excited to see, Android has always been about choice for the users in terms of what device to buy, what device you use, how do you configure your device? And to me, that's really part of that story, right? So tomorrow, I would love to see some users on a foldable, or on a large tablet, or a small tablet, or big phones, or large phones, or whatever. And Compose is going to be a big part of this.
Yeah, that seems very right. Thank you. I think we are now at the last question, which is very general. So we can start with Chris. Can you give us any resources or recommendation for a starter in the Flutter?
Absolutely. In fact, we've been doing kind of a book, reading a book online kind of a program for a really great book, the Flutter Flow. It helps you start from nothing and build up an app over the lifetime of the book that takes into consideration the various kinds of things you're going to do in Flutter. I think that's a great book. There are other good books, other online instruction programs that are excellent. Of course, I mentioned earlier the Flutter YouTube channel, which I think is excellent, as well as the docs and samples themselves on Flutter Dev. I think those are all great places, and in fact, they've all been optimized for beginners, getting beginners up to speed on Flutter.
Yeah. What about Jetpack Compose? Is there any resources or recommendations?
A great place to start is developer.android.com/jetpack/compose. Let me double check the URL. Yes, that's the right one. We have great code labs there to get you started, so it's a very good place to start learning Compose. And it goes through everything you need to know, testing, interrupt, the basic of layouts and creating widgets. There's also a book that's currently being written, but that you can already purchase, called Jetpack Compose Internals. So that's by George Castillo. I'm probably butchering his name. He's from a member of the community, so he's not from Google. And this book really explains how Compose works internally. So it's less about how to use Compose, but how about the runtime works. And I think I'm a huge believer in understanding the system that I use. Because every time I run into performance issues, bugs, and stuff like that, having that knowledge is always helpful. So I recommend that. And of course, all the talks that we've given, all the talks that Devrel has, all the sample codes, we have a ton of resources that you can find on developer.android.com.
Yeah. So check it out and follow the code labs. Yeah. I think
I'm very late for a meeting, so unfortunately I will leave you right now. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Roman. Thank you.
Nice to see you again, Roman.
Thank you. I think we have arrived at the conclusion of our session. Thank you again, Chris, and thank you so much for all our attendees. I'm sadly reporting that this will be our last session in the activity that we are doing. So stay tuned for other activities, and see you in next activities. Thank you again, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Bye.